Hello, everybody. This is Eric with the Paperback Warrior blog, podcast, and YouTube channel. I'm bringing you a book review video today. I normally don't do these. I typically do the podcast with just audio only. I rarely ever appear on camera unless some fool asks me to be on their podcast, which is kind of rare. But here I am, and I'm going to do a book review for you today. This book that we're talking about is Joyride. It was published by Pinnacle in 1983. And I found out about this book in an interview I did with horror writer Brian Barry. Or is it Barry Min? Brian Barry? I think it's Brian Barry. I read his stuff, but I can't remember his freaking name. But he told me about this slasher book called Joyride. It was published in 1983 by Pinnacle. And I found it odd because in vintage horror, the emphasis always seemed to be on creepy kids or demons, a lot of haunted houses, ghost, and maybe survival horror, things like that. But in terms of an actual bona fide slasher novel, well, there just really isn't that many that I can find anyway. Richard Lehman dabbled a little bit with the slasher genre, and the definition of that type of horror is subjective anyway. But for me, just an all around slasher would be teenagers showing up, at a campground or a house to party, and then getting mauled, killed by a killer, or murdered by a killer that stalks them and kills them typically one by one until you get to a final girl or final boy scene. But that just, for whatever reason, you found that a lot in the movies, starting with really Psycho, and then going forward, probably the most popular movies that feature the slasher formula would probably be 1973's Black Christmas, and then 1978's Halloween, and then you get into the full-on explosion of the slasher genre, really through the mid 90s, Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, that kind of thing. Texas Chainsaw Massacre to a degree, it's a little different, I think, with that, um, but yeah, it's a little bit more gory than even what I can fathom with the Friday the 13th series and stuff like that. But um, I normally I've read a lot of horror and I've watched more horror movies than I've probably read horror. In terms of movies, there's tons of slasher movies. This book right here over my shoulder, Creature Features by John Stanley. I've used that book for years. It's it's went with me through various houses, and I use it to research obscure horror, 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. And I've watched my fair share of slasher movies. But this is really the first of the vintage horror novels that I've found that have a true slasher formula. So let's get into it. Joyride, again, was published by Pinnacle in 1983. The author, it's a bit of a mystery. The author's name is Stephen Fry. Now, Good Books says that Stephen Fry is a guy named Robert Patrick. I think Robert Patrick. No, let me look. Donald Patrick, yeah. And he wrote another book called Beyond the Threshold, which was also published by Pinnacle in 1978. But I don't know if this is the same guy. If it is, then he was like a two-off wonder. But I think that Stephen Fry was actually the real guy's name, and I think he was an advertising executive. He wrote just the one book, and then just got out of the business. They say everybody has at least one book in him. I guess he did, and then he was gone. Nothing else from this guy. But what he left behind was this book, and it's interesting because um, it's one of these books that has two different timelines. So the present timeline is in 1982, and we're following a group of teenagers that have just graduated high school, and they're going to a cemetery called All Saints Hill Cemetery to party, to get drunk, to do the nasty, and to celebrate Youth Gone Wild. Why they do it in a cemetery? Stupid teenagers, right? So they go to this cemetery after hours, after dark, and I think they get there at like 8 o'clock at night. So chapters are the present with these kids hanging out in the cemetery, but alternating chapters tell the story of a guy named Robert Atkinson. And it starts out in 1973, 74, and it tells you about Robert Atkinson's life. Robert Atkinson, his family owns this cemetery, they run it. And Robert, he's a 17-year-old kid. His mother's dead. His dad fell into he fell into an open grave and ends up getting paralyzed. So he's in a wheelchair. He's really awful to Robert. He's a horrible, horrible individual, and he's just terrible to Robert and does awful things. And Robert still makes his breakfast every day for him and coddles him and so forth. But eventually, we go into Robert's life in high school, and he's the proverbial nerd, and he reads books and he writes poetry, and he's got a fascination for this popular girl named Carla, and he really likes her, and she has a relationship with him, but it's more like out of pity. But she's really nice to him. She lets him carry her books, and she seems like a nice girl. And she's with this jerk, popular guy, and he's got a gang, and they're really just jerks. And of course, they torment Robert whenever they see him. They trip him, push him, threaten to beat him up, do horrible things to him. And Robert just goes with the flow. There's not a lot he can really do about it. He's got this horrible life at home. He's got a horrible life in school, and all he really wants to do is give these ribbons. He's got these red ribbons that he wants to give to Carla, and throughout the whole book, he's just trying to give these stupid ribbons to Carla so she'll realize how much he loves her. And he writes her some poetry and things like that. She's never going to date Robert. In fact, she's going off to college away from this location, so he's probably never going to see her anyway. But throughout this book, you start to realize that there's something wrong with Robert in the present tense. In the present tense, with what's happening in the present, he's he's sucking air, like he can't breathe properly. So you can always you're always reading that he's sucking air and he's making these heavy breathing noises. And he lives in the cemetery's gatehouse, and his family's all gone at this point. By 1982, his family's all gone. He's living in this gatehouse, and these kids show up to party. And at the very beginning of the book, he ends up killing this dog. Like he just mauls this dog to death, and that kind of shows us that 1982 Robert is this vengeful, angry lunatic who wants to just kill everything, which is a contrast to the 1974 version of Robert, where we see him trying to be a little bit more hopeful, trying to get through high school, and maybe even would go to college and maybe get an education. So two different people. The 1982 Robert, he locks the gate behind the girls so they can't get out of the teenagers. He locks the gate so these teens can't get out of the cemetery. So he locks them in, and it's a pretty sprawling cemetery. It's several acres, and it's tombstones, mausoleums, and this gatehouse that Robert lives in. And then he locks the gate, and then they're trapped inside. Of course, the teenagers go off on their own to do different things. Some of the kids go to make out. Some of the kids want to get drunk. Some kids just want to stay in the vehicle because they feel like it's really creepy outside in the cemetery. There's 9 teenagers altogether, and one second, and I'll say that maybe one of the reasons why there isn't a lot of vintage slasher novels is because you do have to manage several characters. When you have a slasher, you need you need human capital for your killer to thrive off of. So you need several characters, and in this case, you have 9, and there isn't much backstory on the characters. They're all pretty stereotypical. You've got the overweight guy who just wants to eat Twinkies all the time. His name's Twinkie. You've got the lovebirds. You've got the slutty one. They're all pretty 80s stereotypical characters. But maybe that's one of the reasons why authors didn't really focus on this kind of genre in horror, because maybe it was just too much to keep track of with characters. But anyway, they go and do their own thing, which leaves them open to be able to be hunted by Robert in the cemetery and knocked off one by one throughout the book. Uh, Going back to the 1974 Robert, towards the end of school, the kids are playing a prank on another kid, and they have firecrackers, and they want to, I guess, blow up a firecracker near this kid and kind of scare him. But the problem is, Robert, he runs out of the school after they torment him about something, and he ends up getting in the line of fire of this prank that's supposed to happen to another kid. So when Robert gets in the line of fire, his face gets blown off, like, seriously. Um, his face is it's just destroyed, and now you realize why he's making the sucking sounds and the heavy breathing sounds. Is basically after that happened, he becomes a recluse in the cemetery, lives in the gatehouse, and he just lets it go to all the crap. It basically looks like an abandoned house. He's also, it isn't elaborate. They don't elaborate on it too much, but apparently he's also like kind of doing like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre thing, where he has corpses at his dinner table. So he's got these corpses. He's got at least one in the house with him, which I think is his dad, maybe. Um, I don't know. I can't remember. But anyway, throughout the book, the kids just get knocked off one by one in heinous ways. Robert will go back to a tool shed every now and then, and he'll pick out his next weapon, whether it's a pitchfork or it could be a chainsaw. He's got an ice pick at one point. Uh, I think he may use a hoe or something, or maybe he used the hoe on a dog. But what he wants to do is he's fascinated with this girl Carla, so he ends up pretending like this girl Priscilla that's partying in the cemetery is Carla. So he goes, and as he's starting to kill off all the kids, he gets her and he captures her, and he takes her back to a mausoleum, and he puts her inside of a tomb. So when she wakes up, she's in this concrete tomb and she can't get out, and she starts freaking out. She's trying to push up on the lid, she can't get it up. And he comes back and he's telling her, "Hey, you're Carla," and he's planning on raping her, and that's the only thing he wants to do is just in his thought process, he just wants to have sex with her. And I've got my dog, by the way. Hi, Rosie. Can you say hi? And that's all he really wants to do is just those things. Um, but thankfully, you get to a situation where you have just two or three kids left, and they go on the long chase scene to try to get away from him, and it works out. This book, it's unique. It's like watching a 1980s slasher horror movie. The prose is very cinematic, and it follows a very easy to follow plot. Obviously you're getting a little bit different timelines, but it's very easy to keep them in place and keep track of them. The author or the editor does a great job of putting little timestamps above the chapters, so you'll know what year and time you're in. I don't know why the time really matters for 1982. It'll say like 8 o'clock, 8:30, 9 o'clock, 9:30, whatever. I don't know why any of that really matters, but there is some really touching parts of the book where the teachers are trying to come to Robert's aid when he's being tormented in high school, and they really see that he's a great book reader. He has a fondness for literary works. He's got a fondness for poetry. They can see potential with Robert, and unfortunately, because of the accident and his abuse, both at home and in school, his life just gets ruined. It's a great book. I would have to say, if it's mostly timeless. Minus cell phones, which most modern horror is going to eliminate the cell phone from the story, just so the characters don't have a way of escape from whatever horrible situation they're in. You see that in modern movies too, where the cell phone signal doesn't work or the cell phone gets destroyed or taken. This book, without the cell phone, is timeless. If you told me that this was written in 2024, 2025, I wouldn't have disagree with you. The violence is on par with modern horror violence. I mean, you get every squeamish detail of blunt instruments penetrating vulnerable human flesh. You get all the violent details. So in that way, I could see, somebody writing this and having it, brand new as an ebook or something today. So in that case, it's timeless. But at the same time, I can appreciate it as being vintage horror, and it certainly follows the same timeline or same tropes that you would have found in that era, in 1983. You had the peak of Friday the 13th. You had Halloween 2. So many great slasher horror novels were out at this time. So I kind of put Joyride into that same era. It's just a fantastic slasher novel that sort of goes along with that era of movie making. But again, Joyride may be kind of hard to find. I haven't checked the prices, but it's obviously long out of print. I'm not sure why it hasn't been reprinted by one of these publishers, like Valancourt Books or something like that. But who knows? Maybe it will be. But again, Joyride, Stephen Cry. Definitely encourage you to check it out. And I'll catch you next time.